13th chapter of the Hilda Chronicles. This part is called Nibelungen. When all was said and done, Asmund's party of builders and diplomats left a whole week later than Hilda had requested. Ashlar cut stones were lined up in the eastern quarry, as well as piles of rubble, ready to be carted off to the new area's construction site. A few lives had been lost while fetching timber from the forest, but overall, the joint efforts had been rewarding. Harald's dream of Nidavellir had given the Norsemen something to look forward to, a way out of the fog. The route back to Helheim was less of a challenge, apart from the undead elk that had chased one of the riders near Moonstone Hills before getting its antlers stuck in a bramble bush. Hilda had enjoyed her time away from the White Walls, and yet time rarely went by without her thinking of what Hedil was doing during her absence. A thin, waxing crescent moon sailed above them, and dark clouds filled the red sky over Helheim's castle. The riders were worn out, and Hilda wasn't feeling too well. Asmund saw a column of black smoke coiling out of Moon Castle, and didn't like the look of the open gates and no lit torches. In the courtyard, there was another huge bonfire raging. Njal was there, holding his hammer. He didn't even acknowledge their arrival, but focused on the flames. Kyoku rushed out from one of the doors leading to the castle. The undead are here! They keep coming back!
What happened?
Said Asmund, drawing his sword.
Where's Hedil? Hilda isn't well.
He's protecting the children at the southern gate. Come with me, Hilda. I will look after you. Hilda didn't show any disdain and accepted Kyoko's help, while Njal clobbered fiery corpses wriggling out of the bonfire.
I don't know what to do. They won't die. Get everyone out. Lock all doors. Shut the gates and wait till tomorrow morning,
said Asmund, kicking another one of the undead crawling up towards him.
We'll deal with the biters when we can drag them outside without getting burned. You could explain what in hell happened here later.
Hedil joined everyone in the castle's main hall. The courtyard fire logs had been doused, and the bonfire was slowly running out of fuel. The steamy undead couldn't escape, but nobody could close an eyelid. The prince told the newcomers how a few of the undead had crawled over an eastern wall and eaten the southern gate guards. The gate had been left wide open, and soon a herd of the undead had swarmed into town.
We lost many men and women, babies,
said Njal. Asmund gave the king a desperate look.
No, your children are safe. Thank Odin that Edil was nearby to save your wife, Asmund. Without my son's intervention, you would be a widower, like myself.
Asmund was grateful, but couldn't help question the prince's presence near their home.
What were you doing so far from the castle, Edil? You're welcome, Asmund. I was on my way to help with the dock renovations,
said Hedil, using a colourful piece of fabric to wipe his sweaty forehead. Asmund didn't say a word more. After a long night, Kyoko showed up with blood all over her hands and dress. She held her head low and broke the sad news to Hedil. They would have had a son. Hilda was better, but needed to rest. Although a miscarriage wasn't unusual for Helheimers, the fact that Hilda had chosen to ride north rather than stay with Hedil made him mad. He slammed a fist on the table and fled the hall. Kyoko tried to stop him, but Asmund grabbed her arm.
Leave the man be. He needs to mourn the death of his son. Alone.
Kyoko held the baby's tiny button antlers in her stained hands. She thought Hedil would have wanted to know. Hilda hadn't seen the child's anomaly, and Kyoko deemed it wiser to withhold that information from her until Hedil was ready to reveal his other side to her. The next morning was a doleful one. Hilda wouldn't speak to anyone, even Hedil, who'd also been informed of his horse's demise during the northern expedition. If only Asmund had chosen to sail north. The pyre outside was a mound of soggy logs and ashes, but the undead were strangely calm, standing still around the courtyard like herons waiting for a fish to move. As soon as the front gates were raised, they all twitched and ran after Asmund, lured the undead through the first northern gate, down the passageway, and out of the second gateway into the open fields. He galloped out of reach and circled around the castle to get to the southern gate. Hedil waited there for him, guarding the entrance with a bow and arrow from a parapet above the gate. Asmund ignored the writhing corpses and the man who had shot them. Not long after all the undead were forced out of Helheim, a scream was heard from within the castle. "It's Hilda," said Kyoko to Asmund as he entered the great hall. "She is seeing things. I can't control her." "Leave her to me," said Hedil, brushing Asmund aside. Kyoko saw how angry her husband had become, but didn't understand what the problem was. In Queen Asgard's chamber, Hilda sat on the bed with her knees up to her chin. Around her eye sockets, red blotches spread out like birthmarks. She dug her nails into her legs and grit her teeth. Flashes from the past whipped her mind. I know, my love, this is the worst thing that could have happened to us, said Hedil, touching her shoulder. Hilda screamed into his face, and a sort of black bile dripped from her eyes and breasts. The room grew misty. Hedil thought that a candle had fallen over somewhere and checked for a fire. Look, she said, staring at the floor next to the bed. The mist evaporated, and Hedil peered over the edge of the dark red sheets. He gasped. Their son was wriggling about in lumps of placenta.
He's alive, Hilda,
he cried, pushing her out of the way. When Hedil picked up the boy, he was cold. He couldn't feel a heartbeat either. Then his eyes met the child's, and he dropped the boy onto the bed. Congratulations, son of Skuld. Your dead son lives. Hedil wept, holding the child's tiny hand with miniature claws. Skuld. The boy opened his black pebble eyes, similar to a deer's. Yes, my darling. I was told by the woodland folk that your late mother was a huldra. A doe. She wanted you to have a safer, better life, and gave you to Njal and Asgard. So they weren't demons after all, said Hedil, lost in thought. If this Skuld was his mother, who could his father have been? I haven't been quite honest with you either, my pale raven. Hilda thought she knew what he was going to say, how unfaithful he had been, how sorry he was for spending more time with Asmund's wife than with her. Instead, Hedil told her about his transformations, how long he had known, and why he feared she wouldn't understand. Hilda's lips and eyelids grew slightly darker, and her skin was even paler. So, you really did eat our child before he was born, she said in horror. Hedil couldn't deny it. But what did it matter if the boy was still alive?
I couldn't control myself. I was always in a trance, unable to command my body to stop.
So you remember cutting me open alive and chewing my baby in front of the full moon? Oh, Hedil.
You think I'm proud of being a monster? Even our child is what because of me.
Hilda closed her eyes and let her emotions fade away. Her child died years ago in the grove where the lovers would meet. This thing was food for the undead. Her other children Her love for Hedil wasn't even real. You will do as I command. Everyone will. But first... Oh, Hedil, I'm sorry I haven't been as understanding as Kyoko. You do deserve better, she said sorrowfully, picking up the strange child and letting it feed from her glazed breast. The prince felt lost. He needed to know more, and Hilda was surely holding back. Kyoko was there when I needed someone to listen to me. She helped me calm the beast, tame it. She isn't as bad as you think. I'm sure she isn't, my starling. I should try to get to know her more, like you suggested. In her mind, she was remembering being dissected alive by scarlet spiders in a world of pale skies. This island needs a flood of darkness to cleanse its filth. The ash tree demands it. Hilda dressed into cleaner clothes and went to spread the good news of her son's miraculous birth, thanks to Kyoko. The latter didn't understand what could have happened from the time she delivered the stillborn baby to when Hedil decided to enter her room. Her eyes met Hedil's, and the man seemed deeply troubled. Asmund caught their brief exchange and could hardly contain his rage. May the little Nidhogger, son of Hedil, scour our sorry lives and bring us closer to the light.
Nidhogger, poor child,
thought King Njal. Later that day, to celebrate the birth of a prince and mourn the dead citizens killed by the undead, King Njal gathered as many people as he could in the great hall and organized another feast. Times were tough, and food wasn't easy to find, but with the amount of mouths less to feed and the grieving to come, he decided it was for the best. The musicians who had survived the undead Gothi attack played a mixture of sad and joyous tunes to fit the blend of emotions floating around the hall. Hilda held her newborn proudly to her breast and related to everyone what had occurred in Muspelheim.
one realm, one banner, and 3 merc lords,
said Njal, testing the sound of this wild idea out loud.
And we crush the undead together? That's what he was suggesting,
said Asmund.
He was quite convincing. Says we are to forge new weapons in the depths of Nibelungen Mountains, regain our past glory, and conquer new worlds together. My hammer is pretty useless against the undead. I wonder what type of anti-biter blade he thinks we can create in the abandoned forges. Hell knows what dangers lie there now.
King Njal, said Hilda, hiding her baby's head under a blanket. Harald said we need to gather a small army and show our people that we aren't afraid of superstitions. We need to show them that we are ready to protect them, do anything we can to take back our island.
The island of Nidavellir. Well, at least that decrepit fool Radgrid didn't come up with the solution. It might actually work, and could finally put Asgard to rest. If I'm capable of swallowing my kingdom's pride, perhaps Vanaheim might be able to also. My parents need to rest too, King Jarl,
said Asmund. As to mine, thought Hedil, constantly thinking of whom his father was, and what kind of creature this Skuld could have been. Many falcons were sent north and west. None returned from Gran Elgar with positive replies, but the North scheduled a party to meet the Helheimers near the bridge that crossed Hell's Gorges. It was a hot, late summer's day. The air was humid, and the sticky weather felt like a storm was on its way despite the blue skies. King Jarl and King Harald led the expedition together, testing the limits of a temporary rule of 2, while the other third ruler was absent. Both men had brought a dozen warriors and another 6 smiths and carpenters who thought they were capable of getting a fort running. The massive bridge over Hell's Gorges was still intact. Trees and tall grass were growing all over it, and the roots had probably strengthened its architecture. 2 slate obelisks with female heads facing each other formed an impressive portal. Long manes of pale lichen hanging from the pillars swayed in the strong southern wind, bringing the sleeping head statues to life. The combined armies quickly crossed the deep chasm and stood on the other side to admire the great mountains towering ahead. Nobody had lived to tell the tale of what went on there. Only rumors and twisted folklore fed their minds, building up a palpable dread throughout the Norseman troops. Nevertheless, everyone pretended to be impervious to fear and marched onwards. Nobody noticed threads of red light shooting out of the eyes of the other 2 obelisk statues on the western side of Hell's Gorges. The wind began to howl. While Hedil and Asmund were away, Hilda invited Kyoko to stay with her in the castle. The olive branch surprised Kyoko at first, and she seriously considered moving into the cooler lodgings. But she had grown fond of her seashore home, not too different from the one where she used to live in Otarunai. It was simple, quiet, and more importantly, the place where her twins were born. She felt that stability was what they needed. For Hilda, this rebuff was a rusty needle in her side. Ever since Kyoko had sailed to Vanaheim and set foot on their shores, the witch's every breath was just one needle prick after another. Hilda went numb and let an imaginary scarlet spider leg squeeze down her throat, puncture her organs, and come out of the other side. Her rage was diverted to playing the role she needed to play. If she had to be the forgiving, friendly sister-in-law to please the great ash tree, then that is what she would strive to do. The blue flames had told her many stories before she stepped into the black waters, one of which was from long ago. It spoke of the place where she would often meet Hedil when her father had forbidden them to see each other. The grove in Vigrid Plains where they would make love, where they would create a new life that Hedil would eventually tear out and bite to pieces. This trysting place was the cornerstone of her life, and whatever followed. She even saw Kyoko there, letting Hedil drink her blood and wrap her in his arms under Asmund's coat. It was fitting that this very location was once a burial ground named the Garden of Idun. The island's natives would make sacrifices there, mainly women. Hilda saw them bury people alive to feed the forest and the Lord of Trees. They believed the central great ash tree grew bigger and stronger because of the rituals. They also believed that if you buried your arch-enemy alive, you would absorb their energy, and it would heal your spirit, sanctify the land. The tree's roots would consume all evil and cleanse your impurities, bless the crops and fill the fishing nets. Thousands of winters later, worshippers of Mannion Sol still shared similar beliefs and let them flourish. It was understood by the Hofgothi of old that by burying your enemy alive, amongst other things, in the Garden of Idun, it was possible to drain the moon's energy through the ash tree and invoke Hildr, the mighty woodland deity. The level of animosity of the feud between the two enemies would have to be paramount for the ritual to work. That was something Hilda knew she would get a kick out of doing. Pekar and Pokuri played outdoors, chasing butterflies and painting their faces white by scraping off the white lead paint from the city walls. Hilda watched them with disgust. They didn't deserve to breathe the same air that her own child would never taste. Kyoko slit the belly of a sea bream and extracted the pungent gizzards. She didn't throw them out and slopped the slippery tubes into a jar to boil up later for a special welcome home soup for Asmund. He said he loved the dish, especially when she used to cook it for him on the blade of gold. But she suspected he was only being polite. Be that as it may, the tradition would not be broken, and he would surely be happy to see that she had been thinking of him. Hilda let herself into Kyoko's humble abode, which made the latter cut her thumb while chopping a few slices of fresh sea bream. Hilda rushed to her side and dabbed the cut with her dress, which caused Kyoko a great amount of embarrassment. Allow me, Kyoko. In your condition, you should let the castle cooks work for you. You're my sister-in-law, after all. The future king's sister-in-law. Who would deny your importance in the two-headed dragon's lair? It's nothing, said Kyoko, pulling away from Hilda's hands, clutching her arms. She washed the cut in a bowl of brown stagnant water near the door and wrapped a slither of colourful fabric around her thumb. That material, such vernal colours, where does it come from, Kyoko? Asked Hilda, walking up to Kyoko and holding her hand again. It comes from the yukata dress I was wearing when Asmund, your brother, saved me from the sea. You don't take much care of such emotionally important clothing, do you? I doubt that Asmund likes that strips of your dress go missing, even for a few drops of blood. To be honest, I hate this dress. It brings back so much sorrow. Oh, how so? Said Hilda, prying for information, whilst tailoring a new connection between the two. Please, don't feel embarrassed to tell me anything that's on your mind. I want you to think of me as your real sister and forgive me for our sour beginnings. I have, Hilda. Do not worry. One day, when I've thrown away the last strip of my Huchi's yukata, perhaps then I will be strong enough to live in peace. My children need me to be strong, said Kyoko, unfolding the yukata to show Hilda. What happened that makes you so sad? Your Huchi. Yes, my grandmother made this for me before she was killed. I remember getting caught in heavy rain with Bakusa after visiting the rocks where my parents died. The wind howled like the wolves that lived in the ravine's caves, and we couldn't take shelter there or hide under a tree. The river's water level was rising rapidly, and we held each other's hands, expecting the worst. The worst didn't happen again, and the clouds were swept away by the strong winds. The sun replaced the rain, and the beautiful Niji rainbow framed the rocks in strips of color where Happo and Akka lost their lives. Hilda almost felt sorry for the woman. And the yukata was made in remembrance of that happy occasion. I wanted it to remind me of their smiles. Smiles? They were smiling when they died? No, when the rainbow appeared, I saw them again, smiling to us from a distance. I don't understand, Kyoko. What do you mean by you saw them again? After they died, my parents came to say goodbye to me. When I found their bodies, 2 foxes vanished into thin air. They must have been Happo and Akka, just like when they waved to us under the rainbow. You see ghosts. Why am I not surprised? You'd get along well with the Huldra. Oh, but I believe you already do. Am I right? I haven't seen the forest people in years. But you've met some of them, haven't you? I know some too. Who did you meet? Asked Hilda, remembering the Hellsot rappers in the woodland shrine when Kyoko was imprisoned there. I met 2 women who were also vixens. One was alive, a red fox named Kara. The second was Ordur, the dead mother of a fox kid I once found, who grew into a fierce creature called Refer. Ordur? Are you sure? That's fascinating. I have heard of her. Then I met another one, like Refer. A kinder man. Yes, Kyoko? Who was this person? He wouldn't want me to say. My dear, if you mean the man I love, then you must understand that we keep no secrets from each other, said Hilda, pinching her wrist to divert the anger. He told you. I'm so glad. He felt so bad not being able to be honest with you. It was eating him alive. And at the same time, he didn't want to scare you away. Hilda's chest almost imploded. Every word this witch uttered had sharp teeth. You can't imagine how terrifying he would have to be for that to happen, said Hilda mournfully, biting her lip. Her thoughts were filled with nightmares from orphan webs and the howling cauldron. She could still feel the pain from drowning in the wells. It whipped her soul and put her back on track. Do you know how much I care for Hedil? If I told you that he and I share more than our bed, I expect you'd have another fit of morning sickness. Kyoko's puzzled look required an explanation. We share great gratitude for your friendship, Kyoko. Without you, my poor drog of a lover would have lost his mind. He would be one of them out there, snapping through spines of old relatives and dead dogs. Without your kindness, I would be without a husband, and Helheim would have no heir. Kyoku felt tears swelling up and hid her face. Hilda gave her a warm hug and imagined the woman hanging from a thorn tree, dripping blood into a jar she would serve Hedil in every meal to come. Harald rode alongside Astrid and thought of what to say for the first time, face to face. He considered mentioning how strangely familiar her beauty was, and if the two had already met. But he didn't want to appear desperate, or, Odin forbid, boringly predictable. Before exposing his mundanity, Harald hid his eyes as a cloud of dust welcomed the Norsemen to the Nibelungen Mountains. King Jarl called for the group to stop until the opaque whirlwind ceased harassing their horses. A strong smell of metal and slate drowned the sweet scent of heather and gorse, and the air felt significantly colder. The wind died down in spirals of black dust, revealing haggard cedars growing over jagged rocks that pointed towards the sky like fangs. The wide path ahead of crushed slate was as quiet as how graveyards once were, but the horses remained agitated. King Jarl gave Harald a sour look.
You haven't brought us to a slaughterhouse, have you, Harald? I could say the same, Jarl. This does feel like an ambush, doesn't it? I'll lead the way if you wish. That won't be necessary. Asmund, be the better man and do some reconnaissance for us, would you?
I'll go with him, said Hedil, which didn't seem to alter Asmund's lack of enthusiasm for being chosen as fodder for whatever lurked ahead. Asmund nodded gravely and took off with Hedil on his tail. In the distance, Asmund thought he saw a gaping entrance into the Black Mountains. The woodland on either side grew thicker, and he could sense his ride's anguish building up. It was difficult to see anything distinct in the dark woods. But there was definitely movement. Did you see that, Asmund? Cried Hedil, pointing to the gaps between the trees on the left. Asmund didn't need to. A series of chilling howls erupted all around them. The screaming sounds swirled confusingly, while the hidden foes ran in all directions. Both knew what they were up against again, and drew their swords to face the pack of drogs. Despite the snarls, the rock and bark scratching, none of the beasts ventured into the sunlight. Hedil knew firsthand that drogs were not daytime dwellers, but by no means did the sun harm them. Their reticence to attack could mean several things.
Well, either they're too scared to fight us again, Or they've had too much breakfast,
said Asmund casually, pulling at the reins to make his horse rotate. Or someone's commanding them. Asmund frowned at Hedil, but couldn't deny the strange behavior of the wild creatures.
the only other possible reason would be...
Hedil didn't bother questioning Asmund's sudden silence. The path was soaked in shadows. A something eclipsed the sun. A large flying object that must have been the source of the Drogh's fear. The woods went quiet, and the cloak of darkness sailed beyond the mountains.
What should we report? All clear?
Said Hedil, ready to ride back to King Jarl.
At least we know what we're up against,
replied Asmund, not really sure what he had seen above them. Leaving the undead behind for just a few moons was secretly appreciated by everyone traveling west towards the mountains. The cross to bear for being imprisoned in your own home and not being allowed to come or go as you please was maddening, especially for Norsemen used to traveling across the seas farther than any people before them. So even when Asmund and Hedil delivered the grim news of more woods riddled with Drogar fiends, the expedition remained exhilarating for all. A chance to bash some doors down again and squish some more brains. Brave as they were, Harald and Jarl's men and women swiveled their eyes left and right as the Vikings rode up to the foot of a slate mountain. Faint growling was still audible, and the strong smell of death emanated from beyond the trees. Nothing out of the ordinary, but not a pleasant sign when riding through unknown terrain. Asmund's horse reared for no apparent reason, and a string of howls and barks followed from the woods. Flocks of birds burst into the sky, and the earth began to shake.
Shivers of Loki,
cried Njal, but it wasn't an earthquake. Behind them, large teeth of stone dug out of the ground and heaved up piles of dark peat. In a grumble of tumbling rubble, the faint metal scraping of underground mechanisms. Walls now stood high around them, blocking the intruder's path to escape. Panic could be read even on Jarl's face, who fought as much as everyone else to keep his mount steady. The daunting cage walls were too high and slanted to climb. A perfect trap for a large predator. Bor bashed his battle axe against the carved stone obstacle. He cursed vehemently in frustration, while only denting his weapon unnecessarily. Tora and Thorsten remained calm, observing the top of the enclosure for incoming enemies, with similar arrows ready to fly like theirs. Harald stared up at the mountainside. That also seemed impossible to ascend.
Someone picked this spot wisely,
said Harald.
Should we hope they are still alive to finish us off? And we haven't been caught in an ancient designed pitfall.
If we aren't set on fire, fed to lethal snakes and spiders, or used as target practice, then perhaps we could start digging our way out, suggested Astrid.
I don't know how deep these shields of stone go, but it's worth a try, Astrid,
replied Harald, placing a hand on her shoulder. He focused on the slate cliff face ahead and mused.
I wonder if...
Somebody's observing us, said Hedil, feeling a chill run down his arms to his trembling fingers.
Let's wait and see,
said Asmund, sitting down and unsheathing his sword to sharpen the blade. And so they did, for hours, without seeing anything but gliding turns and timid wax wings, until a thin man in strange clothing slipped through the cliff of slate. The man wore a black jumpsuit crested on the chest with a red and silver symbol. 2 white strings hung from his neck. Tiny metal teeth ran down his sleeves and torso and finished their path with a dangling piece of rectangular jewellery. There were 2 square pockets at his belly, but they were sideways, which would cause the owner to lose anything he placed within them. Such a strange man. He had curly black hair, not at all a bush of vipers, although one could see how the facts had been deformed and mystified. On his feet, the man wore rubbery purple boots that had the shine of dolphin skin. But most of all, despite his attire, the man standing before the dozens of Norsemen was of unthreatening stature. He was thin and small. His brittle arms didn't look as though they could wield a pocket knife. And yet he was composed and disturbingly calm. Harald stepped closer, gesturing to the archers to lower their bows.
How did you...
Did I pass through solid matter?
Said the strange man with an unusual accent, swaying his hand back and forth through the rock wall.
See? It's magic.
An arrow whistled between Harald and Jarl and struck its target with a thump to the chest. The stranger raised his eyebrows, then looked down to the arrow shaft quivering under his chin.
You don't like following orders, do you?
He said, snapping the shaft and tossing it towards the Helheimer, who had disobeyed Harald. The Norsemen hastily drew their blades and pulled back their bows, anticipating swift retaliation. But nothing happened.
Worry not, kind travellers. Your murder attempt has failed, yes, but I hold no immediate grudge or swelling desire to demolish you, and for very good reason. The feathered stick has not harmed me much. No, I'm not a wizard or a spectress. I was just pulling your legs. The wall's an optical illusion, a smokescreen of sorts. I cannot blend through stone, and I only obey the laws of nature. Well, I could sink into molten rock, of course, but then I would rapidly kick the bucket, wouldn't I?
King Jarl and the others shared concerned stares and didn't know what to make of this person who defied death.
Are you undead?
He asked.
Undead? Oh, if you refer to the corpses who refused to die far east, then, no. Well, not exactly. Although I have nothing to do with your, infestation.
Not exactly.
Repeated Asmund.
What are you then?
The arrow to the heart was rude enough, wouldn't you agree? Who am I? Well, let me introduce myself, brave men and women of Ash. My name is Ikto. Ixin. Not a common name around here these days, is it?
Ikto, who are you and why did you capture us?
Asked Harald.
Simple precautions. Can't be too careful in these parts of the woods, as you may have noticed. That said, I would love to chat more and tell you the story of my tiresome life, but this is neither the right time or place. But to be fair, I will accept 4 guests into my humble abode and do the best I can to answer all the questions that are buzzing in your brains.
King Jarl turned to King Harald, who shrugged a "why not" response.
How do we know you're not trying to weaken our troops? Cutting the Hydra's head off with one blow.
Tea, perhaps, first? You have my word that no harm will come to you, or you.
Said Ikto, pointing to Asmund and Astrid.
You, yes, and you.
Thor and Hedil felt a jolt of surprise.
Please join me on this memorable day. I do not receive many locals, as you may have deduced.
Harald was slightly flustered by Ikto's choice of guests, but didn't let his emotions show.
May Odin's wrath strike you down if you try to betray our trust.
Trust me, I wouldn't stand a chance against any of your powerful warriors, however resistant I may appear to you.
Said Ikto, scratching the tip of the broken arrow still wedged in his chest.
Come, my friends. I will bring refreshments and tea cakes shortly for the patient people out here. And forgive me for the temporary quarantine. It shouldn't last much longer. We'll be back in no time.
Ikto vanished through the rocks. Hedil looked confused, like everyone else. A hand popped out of the fake wall and signaled him to follow. Ikto huffed and returned outside to offer an arched arm to Astrid, who hesitated briefly and finally accepted to join him, locking arms. They disappeared, and the other 3 held their breaths and stepped into the rock cliff face. when King Njal reached out to touch the secret passageway. His fingers tapped against real slate.
What is this witchcraft? We're obviously being deceived here. Keep an eye out, act calm, and be ready for anything,
said Harald, fastening his uncle's fiery belt. Asmund watched the kings dissolve to darkness as the cave entrance shimmered and turned to slate. See you next time for chapter 14 of The Hill